Do PGA pros play better golf clubs? Are the clubs that professional golfers use, are they better than the clubs that you and I can get at retail? That's the question I want to look at today. So let's go. Hi everyone, welcome to the Mobile Club Maker. I'm AJ, thanks for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we are really going to be looking at this idea, and this is an idea that's been around for a long time, where, are professional golfers using equipment that maybe you and I don't have access to? Is there some secret sauce going on that we don't really know about, but they've got access to it, and it's part of the reason that they're as good as they are and we aren't. So that's kind of what I want to look at, and I want to kind of go at it from a few different directions, answer a few different questions related to that, and hopefully that'll give you a better idea as to what the differences are, or if there are differences between professional quote-unquote equipment and our retail equipment. Okay, so there are three topics that I want to cover today that are all related to our main question. The first one is what tour pros use different? Are the clubs that tour pros use different from the clubs that you and I use, the clubs that you and I can buy at a golf shop, at a pro shop? The second question, or the second topic, and this is related to tour issue. Now, if you've never heard the words tour issue used in relation to golf equipment, just go on eBay and start looking for golf clubs, and you will eventually start seeing clubs that are titled, or in the title of them are the words tour issue. So what is tour issue? What isn't tour issue? How is it different from retail equipment? We're going to talk about all those things. We're also going to talk about, well, there's tour issue and there's retail, but there's also some sort of subcategories also that we should probably highlight and talk about. So we're going to cover all that. Finally, the third topic is going to be, well, now knowing all this, are these clubs, are these tour issue clubs, let's say, are these right for your game? Is this something you should be searching out? Is this something that makes sense for your game? Because in many cases, it's more expensive than regular retail clubs. So is this something that would be good for your game, or is this something that you don't need to be worrying about? So we're going to cover all that today. Okay, so to answer, or to sort of cover the first topic, as far as are the clubs that the professional golfers use different, I thought, maybe the simplest way to do that is to just pick out a few different golfers, a few different professionals. I basically pulled out 3 golfers from the official world golf rankings, ranked number 1, number 25, and number 50. And I'm just going to go quickly through their bags and just sort of talk about what's in their bags, what is basically standard and what is maybe not so standard. But I think what you're going to see is, for the most part, most of what's in any of these bags is stuff that is readily available to anyone looking to buy it. There's nothing special. There's no real prototypes or things like that. This is basically just stuff that you and I can get. So the first off is Justin Thomas. Justin Thomas is Titleist basically through the bag. He's got TS3 in his driver and 3-wood. Upgraded shafts, obviously. He's got a Diamana ZF60 in his driver and a Tensai Blue Raw in his 3-wood. That's an 85-gram shaft. That might be a little trickier to come by, but again, it's nothing that you couldn't find. Just the heavier weight stuff is often a little bit harder to get and is not normally just a stock option or even a basic upgrade option. He has a 5-wood that's also a Titleist, a 915. That's actually a little bit older, and it has a little bit older Fujikura speeder shaft in it. Again, nothing though out of the ordinary, nothing that is prototype or something that you couldn't get your hands on. His irons are a mix of T100 and 620 musclebacks. Again, these are clubs that you can buy at retail. Shafts in them are Dynamic Gold Tour Issue X100s. We will come back in a minute and talk about what is that Tour Issue. Since we're talking about Tour Issue clubs, we're going to hit real quick what Tour Issue refers to there. Wedges, SM7 Vokey wedges with Tour Issue S400 Dynamic Gold shafts in them. And a Scotty Cameron, in this case a prototype putter, although that putter did get released as or some version close to it that you and I can buy. I'm not exactly sure about the materials on the prototype that he uses versus the one that you and I can buy, but pretty similar. The next golfer I picked out was Kevin Kisner. He is basically Callaway through the bag. At this point, when I pulled this list, and I'm not sure, it seems like he kind of goes back and forth with some equipment, but this what's in the bag that I found, which was pretty recent, was him using a Callaway Epic driver, which is actually a little bit older driver head, with a Fujikura F1 shaft in it. Again, a little bit older shaft also. So nothing out of the ordinary there, nothing that you couldn't get your hands on if you were looking for it, at least when it was initially released. At this point, it may be a little trickier. 3-wood, he's got a Callaway Maverick, and he's again got a Fujikura F3 shaft in that. He has a 7-wood, which is again a Maverick, and he's got an Aldila Rogue Black 130 MSI in there, a little bit heavier at 80 grams, but again, this isn't a shaft that would be impossible to find. You could get your hands on one without too much trouble. His irons are a mix of Apex UT and Apex Pros. According to this, it was from 2014, so these are a little bit older irons that he's using, and he's got Nippon Pro Modus 3 shafts in them. Again, that is either in some cases a stock option or a slight upgrade option with those irons, but not anything that you can't get your hands on. Putter is a Odyssey XO7, again, another putter that you can readily find available, nothing special going on there. Oh, and I forgot to mention the grips on Justin Thomas's clubs are just Golf Pride Tour Velvet Cords, and the grips on Kevin Kisner's clubs are just Golf Pride Tour Velvets. Again, standard grips. The third golfer I looked at was Matt Wallace. This is another Callaway guy. Driver, he's got a Maverick driver with an Aldila Rogue Silver 130. This is a shaft that is, again, a shaft that is readily available to anyone who wants to buy it. 3-wood, he's got a Maverick Max 3-wood, again with the Rogue Silver shaft, just in a little heavier weight. He's got a Callaway Apex Hybrid with a KBS Tour prototype shaft. And even though that says prototype, that prototype is just in the name of that shaft. So it's not actually like a shaft that you couldn't get your hands on. You can buy that shaft, that's just what it's called. The irons he's got are the Callaway Pro Forged from 2018. And the shafts he's got in those, I believe, are again, same as Kevin Kisner. He's got Nippon Modus 3s in there, maybe they're slightly different weight. But again, another shaft that is either a stock option or an upgrade option in most cases, nothing out of the ordinary. Wedges, Callaway MD5s in a raw finish, and again, matching Modus shafts in those, and a ping putter that you could easily get your hands on. The grips that he is using, Golf Pride MMC. Okay, so why I showed you all those and why I talked about all those different clubs that those pros use is hopefully you can see that there's nothing in those bags, there's nothing in those setups that is something that you couldn't get your hands on pretty easily if you wanted to. Yes, it would be more expensive in some cases with upgrade charges, but there's nothing really, mysterious or magical in those bags of equipment that you couldn't get your hands on if you were looking at it and get it pretty simply from any number of different retail outlets. Okay, so the second topic I want to cover is really about what is tour issue equipment. And when we're talking about tour issue equipment, we're really talking about the golf club heads. Because when it comes down to it, grips are grips. There's no such thing as a tour issue grip. A grip is a grip. The only difference may be that in some cases, the grips that are on the tour vans, the grips that are going into the pros' hands may be weight sorted more closely. But other than that, they're the exact same grips. And really, it's the same deal with shafts. A shaft that you buy as an aftermarket shaft, if you pay an upgrade price for an aftermarket Fujikura shaft, Mitsubishi shaft, graphite design shaft, whatever, it's the same shaft that they're using on tour, assuming it's the same weight class and it's the same flex. They're the same shafts. There may be a couple random floating out there prototype shafts on tour, but those are few and far between. For the most part, the shafts that they're using are the same shafts that you can get if you can get them in the same flex and in the same weight. The one that we talked about earlier was that dynamic gold tour issue. That is purely a weight sorting difference between the standard dynamic gold and the tour issue dynamic gold. The standard is weight sorted and has a tolerance of 2 grams versus the tour issue where it's 0.5 grams. So it's just measured a little more closely. It's a little bit tighter, so the weights are a little bit more consistent, but that's it. It really comes down to the heads. It's the heads that are going to be what is considered tour issue. Mainly it's usually referring to drivers, 3-woods, 5-woods, hybrids, that sort of thing. Occasionally you'll see them with irons and wedges and putters, but it's really mainly focused on the woods. What is tour issue? The simplest definition really is it's a golf club head that's been picked out and has been measured for its specs and then ends up going onto a tour van or into a manufacturer testing facility where professional golfers will be using it. It'll have a tour issue serial number usually, and often some sort of marking, some sort of stamp or something that lets you know that it is tour issue. But in 9 out of 10 cases, that's it. That's the difference. So this idea that there's special sauce there or there's something different than what the rest of us are getting, it's not really the case. The case is this is a head that's been measured for loft, for lie, for weight, for face angle, for the CT score to see how hot the face is. It's been measured for all those things so they know exactly what it is. But that's it. You know, it's got a different serial number, it may have a little stamp on it, but in most cases, it's not any different from the retail version of that head. Now, there are some cases where it is. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, that's the case. But there are going to be some where you've got second versions or third versions of different heads in maybe different sizes, in different shapes and different profiles that may be preferred by better golfers. You'll see that in like Callaway drivers. You can find them with the diamond insignias on some of them, and these diamond, 1 diamond, 2 diamond, 3 diamond alert you that this head is a slightly different shape, maybe a slightly different size than the standard retail. And in most cases, it's geared for lowering ball flight, lowering ball spin, being a little more workable, that kind of thing. There are going to be a few prototypes out there, of course, always, where you might not be able to get that specific head. Again, those are very rare. And lastly, you will also occasionally find some one-off stuff, which, you know, can be any number of things, like a pro decides he doesn't like the little logo on the crown of the club and wants a golf club without that logo on there, and so they make him one without it. You know, is that tour issue? I guess you would call that tour issue, even though it's really more of just a cosmetic one-off thing. But again, it's sort of, there's kind of a blurred line in between all these different categories. So I know when it comes to tour issue, there are a lot of people who think that, you know, it says tour issue on it, and because of that, oh, well, these clubs, you know, these clubs must be right on the money. The specs are exactly what they're supposed to be. You know, the faces are hotter than what you and I can get at retail. All these different ideas that, you know, these club heads are better than what you can buy at retail. And I'm just going to tell you, it's just not the case. And I can show you very easily why and how that's not the case. I went online, I went on eBay and started looking at different tour issue drivers. I went with TaylorMade. TaylorMade always has a lot of tour issue stuff that you can find online. Different manufacturers will have it, but TaylorMade seems to always have a fair amount on there, so it's pretty easy to find them. And you'll see on here, you've got the pictures of the driver, and you also have on the driver, usually in its plastic, you have a sticker on the top with all the different specs on it. And so the first thing I want to talk about is this idea that the specs are more exact, are tighter than what you find in the retail club. And I'm going to show you a few different heads here and just want you to sort of see what these quote-unquote clubs that are supposed to be right on spec actually are. We had a 10.5 degree driver, that's the 10.5 marked on the sole of the club, that actually measured out at 11.9, so that's 1.4 degrees off as far as the loft. We had a 9.5 here that had an actual loft of 8.2, 1.3 degrees off. We had an 8 degree that actually measured out at 8.8. and we had a 9 degree that actually measured at 10. So what you're noticing here is they're not all exactly where they're supposed to be. And I can tell you because I've done some videos. I did a couple videos a while back now where I actually checked the specs on new equipment from both Callaway and TaylorMade. I did 2 different videos where I got a bunch of their drivers and I spec checked them all against each other. And I will put a link to those videos down in the description. Now, I don't want to ruin it for you, but they are over a year old and the clubs are also over a year old, so I don't think I'm really going to spoil anything here. But what I measured was, in the case of both the TaylorMade and the Callaways, when I measured all these different club heads, the lofts were never more than 0.5 degrees off of what they were written down as on their sole. It was never more than 0.5 degrees for the TaylorMades and 0.4 degrees for the Callaways. So hopefully what you're noticing here is, and these are not the tour issue heads, these are just the standard retail clubs that I brought to the shop, that I put in my spec gauge, and I measured them all. And what you can see is the specs with all those retail clubs was every bit as tight, if not tighter, than the examples I showed you here of these tour issue heads. Again, it's not about how tight, how exact the specs are on these clubs. The difference is the fact that they actually measured them versus the retail head where it says 9.5 and you just have to assume it's 9.5. But guess what? In most cases, it's pretty close to 9.5. The other thing I just want to talk about quickly is this idea of the hotter face, that these tour issue heads have hotter faces than the standard retail heads. And again, it's just not the case. And if you look at it and if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that they wouldn't want them to be the hottest faces. First off, you can see on all these different heads that I showed you here that the measurements are usually basically in that sort of 240 to 245 range on the CT score. That's, 257 is the equivalent of 0.830. That is the absolute maximum that a face can give to be deemed conforming. The standard, or what's supposed to be the limit, is actually 239 or 0.822, which is the core equivalent. The number you always hear, though, 0.830, that's the limit plus the allowed wiggle room for testing. So they say it's 0.830, but it's actually 0.822, and if it gets up close to 8.3, it's okay, but it's really close to 8.2. The CT score is the same thing. 239 is what's considered the limit, but you're allowed to go up to 257. That is the absolute ceiling. But if you think about it, these manufacturers are producing all these drivers. The idea that they would want to put these hottest drivers into the hands of the pros, where these drivers are tested and checked for conformity all the time, just doesn't make sense. Because the last thing any of these manufacturers would want to happen is for one of their clubs, one of their players, to have their driver tested and have it come back as non-conforming. That is a horrible situation for a manufacturer and the player, and they never want to get themselves into that situation if they can help it. So the idea that they would be wanting to put the pros into these very, extremely as hot as they can possibly get faces just doesn't make sense. It's just not worth the risk. It's too dangerous when you're talking about, if we have a CT score of 239 on one driver and we have a CT score of 257, the absolute max on another one, if you run the numbers on that and you hit a golf ball with it at 120 mile an hour club head speed, the difference that you're going to see between those two is less than a mile per hour of ball speed, which means that the result in the distance is less than 2 yards. So if you think that any of these manufacturers, if you think any of these players would want to risk being considered a cheater by playing non-conforming equipment for a couple of yards, I severely doubt it. Okay, so the last thing I want to cover today is, should you actually be looking at these tour issue club heads? Does it make sense to be looking at buying a tour issue driver head versus just the standard retail head? And what I would say is, look, if you know that you want a exact 10.5 degree driver that has a certain lie angle and a certain weight to it, you're not going to be able to say, unless you physically get one and measure it yourself, whether the one that you buy at retail hits those numbers. So if you're looking for exact numbers, then finding one as a tour issue head can make sense. Now, how many of us are actually going to notice the difference in those small variations? As I showed in those earlier videos that I've done, in most cases it's only a half degree, say, one way or the other. How many of us are going to notice that kind of difference? Very few of us, but there are going to be some. So if you're one of those people, then it can make sense that you might want to look at tour issue golf clubs. That being said, I think a lot of people just see tour issue golf clubs and they think, ooh, a tour issue golf club is better, which hopefully I've shown is not really the case. But they think, oh, it's better. And yeah, it's more expensive here on this eBay listing, but it's tour issue, so I should buy it. And just buying it because it says tour issue just doesn't make any sense. Unless those are the exact specs that you're looking for, then you're not really getting anything that you wouldn't get in the standard retail head. Also, you will also find in some cases where there'll be tour issue heads, they'll have tour issue serial numbers, but they won't have the specs with them. And quite honestly, if you're buying a tour issue head without any specs on it, what are you buying at that point? You're buying basically a retail head, because the specs is the tour issue. That's what you're buying. That's what you're paying for in most cases. Now, I'm not talking about prototypes where you maybe have a prototype or a one-off that has a different cosmetic look to it, or a different version of it, a version 2, which is lower spin or a slightly different head shape. I'm just talking if you find the standard club that says, TaylorMade Sim Driver Tour Issue, and it costs more money, but they don't have the actual specs with it, that is never a golf club that I would even consider buying, because at that point, that tour issue just went out the window. There's no value in that if you don't know the specs. I hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, please go down below, give it a thumbs up, and if you have not already, please subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below. I'm also, again, on Instagram now at Mobile Clubmaker, so check me out there. Until next time, take care. We'll see you on the next video. Bye.